扣了一个星期。
对，因为我忘了怎么搞这个。
就是
我们先让这个 run 2天。
第二天，
我重点他们每次我都是这么写的，所以我想解决这个问题。
直接写发给，还不找？
就是你别的什么都没写。
对啊，就是用写的。
就比我买的床，
对，贵了80块钱。
就也就
但是为什么
人民币？
人民币？
他已经给了我了。
就是你看这个。
还要买了4件。
最近好像有时候在打折。
新准备迎接新的一批。
你们有没有那种 data set？
没有，我好像应该我也没有那个。
交给我吧。
用来吧。
谢谢你们所有课的 data 都来自
你可以跟他说一下，就跟那个 professor 说一下，就会把你那个邮箱加进去。
还是最后一期的。
但是他可能会那个，还是会打不开，因为要他那边也 permission access。
没事，我给他，我直接下载。
OK，因为我上次好像没。
确实他 SharePoint。
对。
不要，就是忙手。
Hi, we are gonna go ahead and get started. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good. Cool. Okay, so today is week 4 of Excel. This is the last in our Excel series. Just a couple of things before we get started. If you didn't check your name off on the list when you came in, please do that at some point or on your way out. Also, last time I got a few questions about where to find the recordings and the slides and stuff from this series of workshops. It is on the Annenberg website. It's this one. It's on the annenbergdl.org website. If you just search for Excel is the easiest way to find it, but you'll see this whole series. And down below, there's the recordings and the slides and stuff from the past sessions. So if you want to refer back to it, it is annenbergdl.org. And then the easiest way is just to search for Excel. It doesn't have Excel like in the navigation. Cool. All right, let's Zoom window. Okay, so what we're gonna do today, it's gonna be very similar to our last few weeks in that it's gonna be very kind of interactive, hands-on, workshop focused. So I will be talking a little bit about dashboard design, what that means, and then we're actually gonna get into building our own dashboard in the session today. So there's gonna be probably even a little bit more hands-on time in this session than in our past sessions. So you can think of this maybe as closer to like a lab kind of thing. So I'll give you all a bit of a longer work time kind of in the middle, and I'll be available to answer questions and do that as we work through the project. All right, so just to explain a little bit more about what we're going to do today, the dashboard that we're going to create today is going to use all of the things that we've covered in this workshop so far. So it'll cover formulas. It's going to include some pivot tables, some pivot charts, some new interactive features that we're going to talk about today, some formatting. So we're basically going to bring all of that knowledge together to create a data dashboard. We're going to talk about kind of the whole process of developing a dashboard. Usually when you're creating I guess first to define a dashboard, if anyone maybe isn't familiar with what that means, it's basically a way to present a bunch of data at the same time. So usually when you're doing that, you have, I'm going to use the word client, but it might not literally be a client as in a client of your business. It might be your boss. It might be another team. It might be an executive that you're presenting to. So whenever you're creating sort of a data analysis end product, you want to have in mind kind of who you're creating it for. So we're going to walk through that whole process from thinking about what did our client ask us for? How do we decide what the elements look like? How do we lay it out? How do we add some interactive features? And how do we think about iterating on that dashboard over time? Okay, so this is just a quick run through of some of the stuff that we've covered in all of our sessions so far. If you haven't been able to join us for every single one, we will be touching on most of this today, but like I said, we'll have a longer work time. So if there's something that you missed or a little rusty on from a previous session, I'm here to help. We're a little bit of a smaller group today, so I should have plenty of time to get to everybody and answer any questions. Okay, but just as a reminder, we've looked at data formatting, how to format our numbers, conditional formatting, so formatting based on rules, data validation, that's making sure our data inputs are nice and clean, lots of fun stuff with formulas, including combining formulas and using XLOOKUP or VLOOKUP. We also talked in the last session a bunch about using tables, either static tables you create, or I think as many of us prefer, pivot tables and pivot charts, all of which we'll be using today. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit before we kind of get into the project about what is a dashboard and what are we trying to do here. So if you haven't seen something like this, these are some screenshots of dashboards that are kind of similar to ones I've seen in my career so far. A dashboard is a collection of data, and typically you're trying to do one of three things with a dashboard. You're either trying to provide details, so someone knows sort of the broad situation, but they want a lot more of the specifics, so they want to be able to drill down themselves. You want to prompt action, so you want to get somebody to do something based on what the data is showing, or you want to answer a specific set of questions. And usually your dashboard is going to include kind of a combination of pieces of information to achieve those things. So it might include sort of like a summary table or a table of maybe the top or the average of something that you're trying to highlight. You might include just some individual numbers, just some big kind of like, what percent are we towards the goal? That's like a great number that people often want to know. That can make sense for a lot of dashboards. And of course, you might have a lot of charts, right? Maybe that's what we think of first and foremost when we think of dashboards. So we might have like a pie or a donut chart, bar charts, a bunch of different kinds of charts depending on what software you're using. These two dashboards I took screenshots of here are not built in Excel. But if you know how to build an Excel dashboard, you're going to be much closer to knowing how to do it in other kinds of software you might encounter in the working world. This one is in Salesforce. This one I think might be in Tableau. The concepts are very similar. There's of course a little bit of like, you got to learn the interface for new software, but learning how to do a dashboard in Excel is really useful for being able to do this in other places. Okay, so just to kind of like think about how we want to categorize different types of dashboards. Okay, so when we're giving people kind of I guess the three types I talked about earlier. So our display dashboard is essentially just putting a bunch of information together in a single view. It's not doing a ton of analysis. It's not like adding a lot of layers on top. It's just saying, here's the information, here it is in one place. So you can think of in a car, if you're driving a car, most of the stuff on this dashboard is just displaying information to you. How much gas do I have? How fast am I going? It's giving you all of that in the same view, right? An action dashboard, this is the second type of dashboard I mentioned earlier. You're trying to get somebody to do something with the information that you're providing. So in your car, there's a set of lights that aren't usually on when you're driving, but are sometimes on in certain situations. For example, if someone in your car is not wearing their seatbelt, this like seatbelt light is going to come on in most cars, right? Or if your kind of fuel thing is so low that you're like running out of fuel, you're going to get another light that lights up that says, hey, you're like really out of fuel. Right? These are lights that only come up in certain situations. What these lights are trying to get you to do is take some sort of action or be aware of an action that's being taken. Like maybe you have your high beam, bright lights on. So what's interesting about those dashboards is those tend to be formatted as they'll sort of show up like blank or empty or green if no action needs to be taken. Right? So you can imagine if you're trying to hit a goal and the goal is at 100%, it's already been met. That section of the dashboard is just clear. There's no sort of list of clients that need to be addressed, no list of situations that are going on. So we can kind of design our dashboard. Those are sort of two different ways we could design it around, right? Either information you want to know kind of all the time because it's always just kind of important to be aware of, or things you only want to know in certain situations or really want to highlight in certain situations, okay? And then the last piece, I would call this kind of like a toolbox dashboard. This is sort of the drill down. Somebody maybe has all the data, but they want a tool to be able to dig in themselves. So I think if you think of like your Spotify kind of homepage or your Netflix homepage, any of those those are kind of examples of a toolbox dashboard, right? It's going to show you things that you've been listening or watching recently. It's going to show you, basically present to you a bunch of information that you already know about, but you can go and dig deeper into a specific artist, a specific post. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea of the different kinds of dashboards that you might find. And maybe so you can kind of think about how we're going to be creating our dashboard. Okay, so in general, whenever you're working on a project like this, again, we're talking about dashboards today, but I think this applies to kind of any sort of output of a data project that you're going to be working on. You want to have in your mind, what questions am I trying to answer with this? You should not just be creating a bunch of cool charts because you can. You should have in mind a set of questions that those charts are going to answer. You could also think about what action should be taken by someone viewing this dashboard. It's going to be a dashboard of revenue, and revenue is low. You might want somebody to take action, say on some of the deals that aren't closed yet, right? Bring in more revenue. So you could think about it from an action perspective. And you can also think about it from someone who's looking at this dashboard might be using this information to help them make some sort of decision, right? They're trying to gather information, they're trying to make a decision. What decisions are they making? Are they deciding whether to hire another salesperson? Are they deciding whether to look for more podcasts in a certain content category? What kinds of decisions is somebody going to be making when they're looking at a dashboard? Also, they should be thinking about. Most of what we're going to be doing today is kind of bringing together all of the topics we've already talked about. The main new topic we're going to talk about today is how to add interactive features to your dashboard. So a lot of dashboards that you'll see, like we just talked about Spotify, but there's lots of other ones, they're going to allow you to filter, to drill down, to kind of like make your own sort of choices as to how you want to see the information as the viewer. So this is just a little preview. We're going to get into this later, but we're going to add some tools that are essentially going to use pivot tables, pivot charts as our foundation, and allow us to put in some nice little menus and selectors that sort of an end user doesn't have to know anything about how your spreadsheet works on the back end. They could just look at this. They say, I will only want to see data related to Thursday and Friday. They could click that option and your charts are all going to update accordingly. Okay, so we'll come back to this in a second. I just want to preview that this is kind of the last layer we're going to add on top of everything that we've talked about so far. All right, so this is the project that you all are going to be working on. So again, we're going to be kind of staying in the same kind of topic area we've been talking about the last few weeks. We work for a network. We are a large network. We have 500 podcasts, and the COO of the network has asked us to create a dashboard. So we're going to use our Excel skills to create a dashboard to track the company's top key metrics related to revenue. Okay, so when we were thinking about our dashboard types before, this type of request typically falls under the more kind of car dashboard. He wants to know how much gas is in this car and how fast are we going, right? That's the type of dashboard we're looking at here. And so these are the questions that we've gotten from the COO, and this is the kind of project that we're going to work on in this session. We want to use this data to show our monthly downloads by podcast content category. We want to look at our top 5 advertisers last year by revenue. We want to see cumulative revenue so far this year compared to last year. And then it's usually good when you're kind of creating a dashboard and you're the one kind of like in the weeds, in the Excel sheet, in the software, whatever you're doing. You're kind of the person who's in there the most, and you might think of something else that this person might like to see. So if you're working in a data analyst role and you get a request like this, you're working on a project like this, it's usually really great to think of at least one more kind of stat or chart that you think is interesting as someone who spent a lot of time looking at this information, and kind of like adding one more thing. So the project that we're going to do today is create a dashboard that responds to this. Okay. Before we get into kind of the Excel portion, we're going to spend a couple minutes on just understanding what we're about to do. So typically when you're going to do a project like this, you want to do a little sketch. I sometimes literally do this on paper. We're going to do this in Excel in this case, but make sure you're clear on what are you trying to do? What are the questions you're trying to answer? What types of charts or tables might make sense as you like kind of think about these questions. If somebody's asking for a top 5 piece of information, how might you want to display that versus trend over time? How might you want to display that information? Okay, so generally, like before you get too far in the weeds with your pivot tables, you just want to start visualizing what might I want this kind of thing to look like. Pivot tables can be a great tool here because you can just start playing with them before you have a firm idea of what exactly you want to do. And you can start kind of thinking about also some of the chart types that we've seen so far and what charts might make sense to answer those questions. Okay. All right, so by the end of the session, you're going to have something that looks sort of like this. I'm expecting everyone's will look a little different because you might want to choose a different chart type, a different way you want to display the information, a different format. But this is the type of thing, this is a very standard kind of Excel dashboard type of thing. And this is what we're going to be creating. All right, who's excited? This is pretty exciting. Okay. All right, so if I'm not doing it in pen and paper, sometimes what I do to kind of sketch out what my dashboard is going to look like is just open a fresh sheet and just lay out a couple text boxes. Just lay out for my brain, okay, these are the questions I know I need to answer. I think I'll do a line graph. I think I'll do a pie chart. This is kind of the way I want to lay it out. So for example, if I were going to do a dashboard about my little ice cream data set, I might do a pie chart of all the different flavors that we offer and how often they're ordered. I might do a line graph that shows sales over time, right? We'd expect it to peak in the summer. And then I might just do some sort of table or simple chart up here that just has kind of the top flavors just to highlight those. Right, so that's kind of like something I might sketch out before I even like fully get in my data. If I were going to be making this for, you know, the owner of an ice cream shop, that's maybe something I would sketch out. Okay. In Excel, you can just put text boxes wherever you want for like visual design. Obviously, don't do that in any of your analysis because you can't use formulas or anything in a text box. But you can throw them in as just sort of like a layout. They'll sort of lay on top of your sheet. All right, so the very first thing that I want you to do, make sure you can get to this week's data set. If you have any issues with that link, let me know and I can add it to you or send it to you specifically. But I want you to look at our prompt. So here's the prompt again for our dashboard and just create a little, like open a tab, lay out some text boxes or just kind of type some thoughts. If we're going to be creating a dashboard that answers these questions, how might you start to visualize that in your mind? Maybe do you want to do a pie chart for this one, a table for this one? Just kind of start jotting that down for yourself so that you have something to work from when we actually get into creating our components in a minute. Okay, so just take a minute, make sure you can download the sheet and take a moment to kind of sketch out how you might want to lay this out. And if you want to start kind of scrolling through the data set and just thinking about maybe one other kind of chart or stat or something that seems interesting that you might want to add. I'm going to give everybody a minute to think about that. All right, I'm going to keep moving. But I would, in general, I would encourage you, I know it's very tempting to just jump straight into the data, start adding stuff. I encourage you to take a minute to do this sort of step before you start sketching things out. It makes things a lot easier as you go. All right. So when we think about building our dashboard, each sort of item in your dashboard is called a component. Okay, so your dashboard might have several components. One component might be the pie chart, might be the table, might be the sort of interactive slicer that you want to add later. So you've got several different components, and you want to think about building your dashboard as working on one component at a time. Usually what I do when I'm doing this is I'm kind of working on each component in its own pivot table, in its own sheet or tab in my workbook. So I'm like kind of figuring it out there. And once I have it how I want it to look, at the end, I will move them all to one tab to create sort of that unified dashboard view that I showed at the beginning. All right. When you're thinking about your components, probably most of your components are going to come from pivot tables. So I would say just like create your pivot table, start playing with the groups, make sure you're able to get the groupings that you want. You might find that you need to add some formulas or some additional columns to your data set to be able to get the data to group the way that you want. See an example of that. If there's a part of your dashboard where you wanted to show a single stat, if you wanted to show revenue so far this year or percent of something, you wanted to show a single stat, you might not need a pivot table for that. You might, in that case, just type a formula directly into a cell. But again, you want to this is why it's so useful to start sketching it out at the beginning. If you know you have a single stat, you might just want to work on a formula rather than pivot table, but kind of up to you. Okay. And then the last thing I would say is just as you're working, this sheet might get a little messier than some of the sheets we've used in the past couple weeks. So just make sure that you're labeling your tabs or your sheets as you go, just so you know what each component is. It's easy to lose track because they're all kind of big, all kind of look similar. Okay, but I would say don't worry about like colors, formatting, don't worry about that stuff yet. What we're going to work on first is getting each component created and making sure that we have our pivot tables, formulas, whatever we need in place to get what we want. Make sense? All right, so like I said, using our same prompt, we're going to work on building out sort of a first stab at each of our components. Do not worry about colors and formatting and stuff yet. Okay, so your dashboard is probably going to have at least 4 components. It's going to have a component for this one, a component for this one. For 3, you might choose to do that in a single component or 2 side by side, up to you. And then whatever you want to add as your last stat chart. Okay, so your dashboard is probably going to have at least 4, maybe 5 components. If you feel like you're rocking and rolling with Excel today and you want to add a couple more and play with some other stuff, that's totally fine. Okay, so that's a lot of components. Like I said, think about working on one at a time, each in their own sheet. And I have some hints for you as to how you might want to start looking at each of these components. Okay, so these 4 are just the same as the 4 from our prompt before. These are some little hints. You can look at these or not to get you thinking about what you might need to do to get from data set to first draft of your components. So if I were you, I would open a new sheet in my workbook. I would start with this very first one, start playing with a pivot table and seeing what you get. So I'm going to allow some time for you to get kind of like a draft version of all 4 of these. I think people might be kind of working at different paces a little bit. So I'm going to say, I'm going to give everybody maybe 10 minutes or so to kind of get started on this part. Okay, you don't need to have a finished dashboard at the end of this. You should just kind of have roughly like a pivot table or something that's sort of closer to what you want your final product to be. I will be here. Please wave or holler if you want help, and I will come help you out. Okay, that's roughly our 10-minute mark, so I wanted to check in. How are people feeling about component one? People feel like we have a draft, we have an idea? Seeing a few head nods. Okay, maybe I can get someone to tell me. You did. Make copy of this. Demo copy. All right, someone who who thinks they have a good kind of initial thing for this component, wanna tell me what you set up? What you got?
Okay, so I go to the shows tab,
Okay, on the shows tab,
select all, add a pivot table.
great, I'm gonna insert a pivot table, fantastic. Cool, just gonna do it in a new sheet. Okay,
And I select category as row
category is row, very good.
and monthly download as value.
Download this value, all right. Right, very good. All right, we wanted to get monthly downloads by podcast content category, and we have monthly downloads by podcast content category. Very good. Cool. All right. Anyone have anything different or anyone have questions about this one? Okay, great. Did anybody get started on component number 2, top 5 advertisers in 2023 by revenue? Anyone thinks they kind of have a start on this one? I think some people might still be working on this one, but did anyone get at least the revenue component, right? In our data source, we don't have a revenue column. So did anybody figure out getting our revenue column added to our data? So go look at our campaigns data. There we go. All right, so I'm looking at our campaigns data. I have our CPM, which remembers our cost per 1,000 downloads. I have our show ID, I have our month, I have our advertiser name, and I have my campaign ID. So I don't have revenue in here, but I do want to find out what my revenue is So my prompt is top 5 advertisers by revenue. So I can see that I have a bunch of advertisers. I can see that they're buying ads at different CPMs on different shows, and I want to know who has the top revenue. So first thing I need to do is get a revenue column in here based on the CPM that this show was sold at. And this is based on cost per 1,000 downloads. So therefore I need to know the downloads associated with each show. All right. Here's some hints about how we would get our downloads and how we would get our revenue via formula. This formula is pretty simple. Once you get this one, you can use XLOOKUP or VLOOKUP. Does anybody have an XLOOKUP or VLOOKUP? I'm gonna give everybody a couple more minutes. We'll check back in on this one.
One question, like in show category, like the ID mean show ID or there's another ID?
Okay.
Like this ID is show ID.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Correct. Yes. So yeah, so on your shows tab, we have an ID column. Then on another column, we have or in our other for campaigns data, we have a column called show ID. So we want to be able to, if we're just looking at this first row, campaign 1 for MailChimp sold at a $23 CPM for show 209. If we hop over to our shows tab, yeah, this column does not say show ID, but it's the only ID in our shows data set. So that's a good indication that we should use it. Yeah. So for here, we would go and look down to show, we could scroll all the way down to show 209. See how many downloads it has. Way down here. All right. So we could go look so that we know if our V or X lookup is working correctly, but show 209 has about 186,000 monthly downloads. So if we add a V lookup to this column or an X lookup to figure out how many downloads we have based on the show, I would want to make sure that this one is that 186,000 number. Right, does anyone think they have an XLOOKUP or VLOOKUP? Working? Yeah, in the back? All right, cool. What you got?
XLOOKUP,
XLOOKUP,
D2 for me, which is the show.
D2 or show ID, great.
Then go back to show,
Right, so for our next argument, we're gonna go back to shows.
selecting the entire column of A,
There, column A, which is our ID column, great.
and then the entire column of
Great, entire column F,
downloads,
which is our downloads, fantastic.
and comma not found.
All right, great. Double quotes or double quotes or whatever, not found. Double quotes, okay, sweet. Okay, beautiful, and there's our 186,000 number. All right, so we just did our XLOOKUP function. We went and grabbed our arguments, which are our show ID, the column we wanted to look for our show ID in, the column we wanted our corresponding result from. So if we find our show ID in a certain row in the A column, we want to go across that row and grab the value from the F column. That's what we're doing with this formula. And then if we don't find it, we're going to pop in a nice little error message. Okay. Great. All right. This is a partial but critical step toward getting to our revenue columns. I'm going to go back to my little hints. All right, here's our little hint formula to get revenue from CPM and downloads right here. A moment. Revenue formula. All right, who has a revenue formula that they think might be working? All right, we're gonna add my revenue. What do I got? What should I do next? Yeah. Equals
C2 times
C2, it's my CPM.
and F2 deducts 1,000.
Downloads divided by 1,000.
Divided by 1,000. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, great. There's my revenue. I can do a little mental check. Okay, 186,000 downloads. My CPM is about $23, so this should be about 23 times 186. 20 times 200, it's about 4,000. Okay, looks good. The math checks out. All right, very good. All right. That formula all the way down. There we go, all the way down. All right, any questions about how we got our revenue formula? All right. Cool. For myself, I might just come in here and swap this to currency just so I later remember that this is my dollar value. Now, I want to point out here that we have a couple little data gaps. Okay, we have a case where we have this show that had 0 downloads, so it's showing 0 revenue. In the real world, that's probably like a data quality problem. This show, if it sold an ad at a $69 CPM, it probably has downloads. In fact, it probably has quite a few, but there's some sort of issue going on. So that's just something that you might notice as you're kind of the data analyst. So that might be either something you would need to go and fix in your original data source, to go and fix in your shows tab, or to go check in whatever system you got this data from. Okay, for the purposes of this, This isn't real data, so we can't go anywhere, but it's something, that's a type of thing you should be looking out for. If something's showing up as 0 or not found or whatever, is that because you expect it to, or is that because maybe there's something else going on? Okay. All right, so we got, we added a revenue column to our campaigns 2023 data sheet, which is great, which puts us in a much better position to answer the question, what were our top 5 advertisers in 2023 by revenue? Which we can do with a pivot table. Does anybody have a pivot table for this one? We just added our revenue column. I'll give everybody a moment to work on a pivot table.
Well, I don't know why it starts showing this instead of the payments.
Ah, okay, so that's gonna be like your little builder. So if you come over to your pivot table fields thing right here, that'll allow you to do your drag and drop. Yeah.
Thank you.
So when you start your pivot table, if you don't see your fields list over on the right, just look up in your toolbar or in your tabs on the top, and you should see, either should say field list or pivot table analyze, and then you should find field list under there.
So,
Yeah.
We've already created a pivot table
Mhm.
and turned this from sort by the sum of the revenue title. The neutral wide gap is, I think this is less than this one, than all of them, but this is in the middle. But then all the other data are correct.
Interesting, okay. The next thing I would do to check that is I would format all your numbers, make sure those are all formatted as currency. 'Cause it's a little hard to see because they're kind of like different numbers and stuff. So I would, yeah, format your numbers.
Oh,
Just in your home tab there.
oh, a change.
change it to currency.
Yeah, currency or
Oh,
county.
okay.
That works.
Yeah, so it might just be that it was rounding to a different decimal place for some reason.
哦，都在这边，看这个 label 这边，然后你选看这个 sort by advertiser name，改成 sum of revenue by
All right. Okay, you got that sorted out? Yes. You want to tell us how you did your pivot table?
Yes. So in another sheet, you can insert a pivot table.
All right, so I'm gonna select my data. I'm gonna do insert. I'm gonna do pivot table. I'm gonna do mine in a new sheet for the purposes of this. All right, continue.
And so you choose the monthly downloads and category.
All right.
Oh,
great.
no, it's another one, sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Sorry, so you choose advertiser name and revenue.
Advertiser name. Okay, great. And then the second thing you said was revenue.
Revenue, yeah,
All right, and then you did sorting as well, right?
yes. And you can choose a filter in advertiser name and sort by value.
Okay, very good. Sort
And
by
change it to, oh, yeah, sum of the revenue. And
revenue, largest to smallest. This little pop-up will look a little different if you're on Mac, but same same thing. You can sort by value and go by descending. So you're essentially just using the values from your revenue column instead of going alphabetical by your name. Okay? But an interesting question pop up. These look sorted, but then this one looks like it should actually be smaller. It should actually be at the end. Okay, some of you might have noticed that. It can be a little hard to like squint when there's so many numbers. So usually for this, I would either format these as currency or at least add my thousand separators, add those commas so that I can see how big the numbers are. And if I do either of those, I can see, aha, it is, you know, in the correct place. It's sorted between these two rows. It was just rounded to one fewer decimal place for some reason. So the number formatting menu is always your friend if anything looks weird. All right. Did my sorting. I can also do, if I just want to see my top few of these, I can come into my value filters and I can choose my top and only display my top few items. So in this case, maybe I only want to see my top 5 advertisers. I can change this to 5. And it'll shrink my table down to just show me my top 5. So I got there by doing my little filter menu in my pivot table. I already did my sort by value, so that we did before, but then I came down here and added one more thing, which is my value filters. This is gonna let you filter anything out. So let's say you had some deals in here that were zeros, you wanted to filter those out. You could do that here, saying, you know, something greater than 0. You can also do this top 10. Kind of funny that it's a label top 10 because you can pick whatever number, but I chose 5. Say if I change it to 6, I'll watch my table update and it'll bring in my 6th top advertiser. Okay. Any questions about getting our top 5 advertisers? Okay. How are we feeling? Too hard, too easy? Completely lost? Feeling okay? Okay, all right, great. All right, so we covered our monthly downloads by podcast category. We covered our top 5 advertisers by revenue. Next component that we're gonna work on is cumulative revenue so far this year compared to last year. Now this one, there's a few different ways that you could do it, all right? So I would suggest if you're feeling a little lost looking at this one, I would just start with 1 year. Just start to think about how would you show the first part, cumulative revenue so far this year. You could use the chart we did last time, start a new pivot table. How might you display that in a table or chart? Okay. Now we do want to compare to last year, so you'll notice we have our campaigns data, in this case, in 2 different tabs. All right, we have our 2024 and our 2023. So this question is asking us to compare these 2 pieces of data. So we could do this in a few different ways. You could make a separate chart or table for each of those and put them side by side. You could decide you want to combine these data sets and sort by date. A lot of different ways you could do this. Up to you. I would say maybe start with just one, visualizing cumulative revenue in just one of these years if you're feeling a little stuck. Other things to do if you're feeling stuck, just start a new pivot table, start playing around, start a pivot chart, start playing around, just like visually drag and drop some things. All right, I'm gonna put our prompt back up so you have it. So we should be working on this component, cumulative revenue so far this year compared to last year. Okay, I'm gonna give everybody a couple minutes to work on that and then we'll come back together. Mhm.
change the month to date. Date, I think the date is January.
Yes, okay, so you're using date formatting, not a date formula.
Oh, okay.
There, okay,
Got it.
yeah.
But do I need to? Because what I did is I did the download and the revenue. So, but I don't know how to do the date formula. Does it matter? Because I can get the revenue as well.
Yeah, you've got revenue, which is great. Now, if you
Uh,
wanna do, yeah, so kind of, you may or may not need that depending on how you're gonna do it. Yeah, so you could try just creating a chart from what you have so far.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right, how we doing on this one? We got our revenue part to work on, we got our date part to work on, we got the chart part to work on. Anyone have the revenue piece together? Anyone figure out getting revenue added to your 2024 campaigns data?
Oh, 我在想的。
Oh,
Right, because no matter what we're gonna do for this one, no matter how we're gonna format our final chart, we need revenue. Right now, we have revenue on our campaigns 2023 data, but we do not have revenue on our campaigns 2024 data. So what are we gonna do to get revenue on here? Hazard a guess and say, probably you did the same thing that you did to get revenue on our other campaigns tab, yeah? All right, let's just run through it one more time. I did X lookup. I went and looked at my show ID. I went and looked in my shows. I went in a column where I'm looking for my ID, column where I'm looking for my monthly downloads, and I'll do something like not found, but can't find that ID. Beautiful. Okay. There's my downloads. Now I could get a little fancy here and stack my formulas, and I could say, I'm just gonna do this X lookup and my revenue formula all in one. Okay, this is our combining formulas that we talked about in week 2. So I could say, all right, take whatever you find in this X lookup. That's my downloads. I wanna divide those by my 1,000 and multiply them by the CPM, which is in D2. All right. And I can get my revenue all in one column, whereas here in our 2023 tab, we did this in 2 columns. We did our X lookup here and we did our revenue here. Okay, so in this one, we're doing our X lookup as its own formula, and then we're taking the result of that formula, which is an F2, and we're using it here. What we did in our other column is we essentially said we put in this formula and then just typed in our whole long X lookup thing where this formula is just referring to F2. Okay, so compare this in our formula bar to here, where it's exactly the same. I guess I transposed the math, but you can do that with multiplication, right? So I'm taking this whole thing, it's gonna give me my downloads, and I know that my revenue formula is by downloads divided by 1,000 times my CPM. So same thing, but I'm accomplishing it in one column. Neither is right or wrong. They're both totally fine to use. This one, where you do them in separate columns, is a little easier to debug. So if your data doesn't look right or your results don't look right, definitely recommend trying them out in 2 different columns. All right, but if you're feeling good about it, you can do it this way. And I'll come on down. Copy this. Way down. All right, does this make sense with stacking the formula? You don't necessarily have to do it this way, but a little bit. Okay, All right, so we're checking along here. So we want to compare our revenue so far this year to our revenue last year. Now, there's something a little funky between our two data sets, which is that in this data set, we have our campaign month, which is all nicely formatted as a date. So it looks like it's always the first of the month of the year 2023. And then in our campaigns data from 2024, it's formatted a little differently. We just have the month. I know this is pretty common. You might get some different data sets. You need to combine. The formatting is a little different. This one we know from the labeling that this is all 2024, but these are just month numbers. These aren't date numbers. So depending on how you want to do your chart, you may want these to be formatted as dates. Did anybody play with the formatting or formulas for dates? Okay, I think I saw over here, one thing that we tried was formatting by date. So whenever our data looks weird, one tool we have in our pocket is to come at a format by date. So I could try that. I could just say, let's format this column by date. But then it gets super weird, right? They're all from 1900. I don't think they had podcasts back then. So that's probably not right. I'm gonna go switch this back to general. Thankfully, whenever I use my little formatting menu right here, all my data was here. I didn't lose it. It just looked weird for a second, but I came back. So don't freak out if you format and it all starts to look weird. You can always change the formatting back. All right, but I want my dates to be showing up like this. I want them to have that month number, but then I want them to have the first 2020 showing up as dates. So there's a few different ways I could do that, but one way I could do it is use the date formula. So to do that, I'm going to do equals. I know the name of the formula is date. I'm going to see it pop up as a formula, so I know that's a possible option. Open up my parentheses and I'll get my little helper text open here so I can see what it does. Okay. So this one returns the number that represents the date in the Excel date time code. Okay, something Excel will recognize as a date. So the example it gives us is equals date, and then it gives three numbers, 2008, 1, 2. So it looks like all it's doing is taking our separate date components and building it into a date just from those numbers. So if I wanted to make this formula give me these month numbers, but showing up as months in the year 2024, how would I do that with this formula? What would I give it as my first argument? Yeah. 2024, sweet. Very good. Comma E2, very good. That's the month I want to give it for this particular row.
And then we want the first, right?
I'm sorry?
The first day, so 1.
Yes, exactly. First day, great. Doesn't necessarily matter which day, but I noticed in my other data set, they're all the first, so might as well keep it consistent. Fantastic. Okay, so this formula took this month being number 5 and just formatted it to a nice little date. Very cool. Thank you for that. Same thing, I'm gonna paste this all the way down and we notice, right, for month 1, it's January, month 6, it's June, etc. Looking pretty good. Let's keep date. Make sure you give your columns a name. Okay, so we now have our data a little bit cleaned up, right? We have our revenue added in, we have our date formula to convert the month to a date. Now we want to be able to look at our cumulative revenue in a chart, maybe compare each year. Did anyone take a stab at getting a chart for this? Maybe we just got some of our data cleaned up, so maybe I'll give everybody a minute. Think about how you would do a chart. You can do this, like I said, 2 different ways. You could do a chart for each one and and the end of goal could be to put our 2 charts next to each other. Okay, or you could try combining these 2 data sources into one chart where you can compare the years. Up to you, okay? Give everybody a couple minutes to play with their chart. I would definitely recommend pivot table to pivot chart so you can play with it and see it adjust. Yeah. Yes, definitely. So do it one of two ways. You can do your X lookup as one column and then do the second part as the next column. But you just want to divide by 1,000 and multiply by the CPM. We do it in either order because it's multiplication division, so.
So I still don't understand like the meaning of this, like.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the revenue we calculate in 2023?
Yeah, okay, so let's, why don't you click on your, click on one of the cells there, so you can see the formula.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, I
So
understand this
it's
formula.
Okay.
But like.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah, so all I'm doing here, so in your formula, right, you're using the downloads that you're using are in F2. So you're saying to get my downloads, I'm gonna go to F2. In that formula, I'm saying to get my downloads, go do this whole X lookup thing. It's like, it's just said that whole long X lookup in the parentheses is just substituting for this F2 that you have right there.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, good question. Yes, exactly. Yes, great. Yes, good question. Cumulative meaning that in February, we should count February and January. In March, we should count February, January, and March. Yes, good question. Right, anyone have a first draft of this one, an initial pivot table, an initial chart? Maybe it's not quite right yet, but something you got so far. You got some back there?
I created two charts.
Okay,
two
great. Yeah, there's a
tables.
few different ways to do this one, so we can do that. Yeah, what you got?
So I selected first one for 2023. So all the
2023.
data.
All the data?
Created a pivot table
The table, beautiful. I'm gonna do it in a new sheet. All right.
with campaign month
Campaign month.
the rows, and then value sum of revenue on values.
Sum of revenue and the values. Okay, great.
And then I like used that and created a cumulative value column.
Ooh, okay.
Which I
Over here, like this?
Yeah.
All right, great. All right, and what you got?
So for that one, it would just be sum of value. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the one below, I put using the sum formula,
Okay.
equals, with the one on top and then the one below that.
All
And
right, so
then
the one on
adding,
top and then the one below, like
Yeah.
this?
and then adding the dollar sign to B4.
Adding the dollar sign to B4 because our dollar sign is gonna do what? It's gonna glue our top of our sum here so that as we copy our formula down, it's always gonna count from the top row. Great. All right, let's take a look at that. Okay, now it looks like these are rounding a little differently depending on how wide I make the column. Just for the ease of just checking this with my eyeballs, I'm just gonna switch this format to currency just so I can see a little easier. Okay, let's just do a quick mental check. So this first one, for January, I had 1.3 million, great. Looks like in February, I had 1.26 million. So then for my cumulative in my second row, I have 2.5, which is roughly my 1.3 plus my 1.2. Looking pretty good, checks out logically. So I'm gonna drag that formula on down. All right, and then I can check and I can make sure that my dollar signs are doing what they're supposed to do. So here I'm summing B4 to B5, right? I'm summing my first 2 months. So I'm getting cumulative as of February. As I move down to March, I'm summing my first 3 months. So I'm getting cumulative as of March. That checks out 1.3, 1.2, 1.3. That looks roughly correct. All right, same as I go on down, I can see I'm summing B4 to B7, et cetera, in my formula bar, and then my B4 is staying the same because I added those dollar signs, which are my cell reference, right? Cool. All right, and so then just one more check at the bottom. So my cumulative December revenue should be the same as my total revenue for the year, right? Because cumulative at the end should be the same as grand total, and it looks like they are, right? These guys match, so that's another way I know my cumulative formula worked. Great. All right, cool. The only thing you want to be careful about, this is a totally valid way to do this. Like I said, there's a few different ways you might have done this. Anytime you're going to add a column just manually to a pivot table, just make sure you don't come and change this pivot table. Because if I come in and add another like row breakdown and it's going to expand it a whole bunch, this formula is not going to follow it necessarily. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. But if you know this pivot table is good and you want to add it here, totally cool. All right. Did you play around with adding a chart at all?
I'm actually not so sure like how you should add the chart, but I did that for 2024 and then created a table and then did a chart to compare the cumulative revenue.
Okay, great. That totally works. Okay, so essentially did the same. I'm gonna label my little sheet here. So I'm gonna say 2023 cumulative. Great, so you essentially did this same thing in another sheet for 2024. Yeah,
Yeah, well, I put them side by side.
side by side. Cool. Okay, great. Totally valid. Did anybody else look at this a different way? Did anybody do a different kind of pivot table? Okay, that's cool. So whenever we get data from multiple different sources, we can kind of think about it a few different ways. Comparing in two different tables, two different charts is totally cool. We could also combine our data sets. So you could create yet another tab called campaigns and kind of copy paste everything so that everything's all in kind of one set of columns, to put it all into one place. That's another valid option. So kind of a few different ways you can look at this. And usually when you're creating a dashboard, the person who's asking for it is not gonna have sort of enough technical like details to tell you exactly like you should do it in 2 pivot tables or 1 pivot table or whatever. It's gonna kind of be up to you and however you think it could best be visualized. So I'm gonna show you just another simple example of how we could do this one. Switch my screen share to get this to work. Not really quick. Great. So we have this guy. And share this one. Okay. So just to share as sort of another example, another way we could have approached this, I'll show you my one from my little demo here. This is a pivot chart. So this is based on another pivot table that I have. You can see I've got my month. So I did 2 separate charts, one for each year, okay, 2023, 2024. In this case, I just did a very simple pivot table. It's just doing revenue by month. So I didn't even take the step of adding that extra formula that you did. But when I picked my chart that I wanted to include, show the chart that I picked, I did a line chart down here, and I did this one that is stacked. Okay, is that gonna show up? No, 'cause it's a little pop-up. Let me get that to show. Okay, but basically if you go to change chart type up here, which is what I've done on my screen and is not showing. For you to go to chart type and then line, you'll see a few different options. You can have line or stacked line or area or stacked area. And what stacked area is gonna do just visually is what the cumulative formula does. So you'll see that this one ends up about 1.5 something million at the top of this graph. Here, the numbers are very tiny, but you can sort of see, right, it ends up 1.5-ish million. And that's the same result that we got using the formula, the cumulative formula, doing it the other way. Okay, so in this case, like I just did a very simple, only visually. I don't have like a table that shows the cumulative numbers like we created over here. But it answers the same question, right? It's showing the same information, just in a different visual way. So both of those are valid approaches. Whoever's reading this dashboard might prefer one or the other, just kind of depends. Right? Cool. Switch my share back over to this guy. Yeah. Great. All right. So whether you did it as a table and a formula or whether you've just got a simple pivot table, whatever you've got, I do want you to take a stab at making a chart yourself that's going to accomplish this. So either make 2 simple charts. You can kind of summarize the data and use that cumulative formula, create a chart from there. That totally works. You can combine your data into a single set of columns, create a chart from there. Also totally works. All right, but I want everyone to get a chance to try creating a chart or charts that compares 2 data sets. Okay, so I'm going to give everybody maybe 4 or 5 more minutes to work on that piece, and then we'll move on to our last part. Okay. Yeah.
So is there any way we can combine like the 2 into 1?
Yeah.
Is there's a way?
I mean,
Because now it's like different chart, so.
yeah, it's a different chart. So yeah,
Yeah.
so once you have your chart, yeah, so I mean, the way to combine the data is to like create a new tab and like copy paste it all.
But they can like turn 2 pivot table into 1 chart? Is that so? Because I tried to do it, but they cannot.
Tell me what you're at. Maybe we'll look at it. I'll be able to answer.
Sorry, let me do it again, because.
You select all your data before you do that step, it'll save you the. Oh, I think it's trying to go over an existing spot. Yeah. Oh, it's, okay, wait, do that one more time. Let's get that error one more time. Great, all right, let's say it's saying field name is not valid. Okay, field name is usually pulled from the column header, so is one of your column headers blank maybe? Ooh,
Oh,
yes,
here.
that one's blank, yeah. If you do
Don't do
Command
it
A
again.
on your keyboard before you do insert pivot table, cancel out of that. So yeah, just hit cancel. Yeah, do Command A, click in here, any of those cells, Command A. Yeah, Command A. Command first and then A. Should be doing like a select all. Okay, weird. All right. Just. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why that one's not working, but yeah, go ahead. That does the same thing. This gives you a little.
Oh, the
little blank.
comment. We got date.
Top maybe.
Oh, there we go. So here.
Yeah.
So, I'll create like. Yeah. So my question is like, I have like two chart right now. So it's possible that I put,
Combine them from here, you're saying.
yeah, just because the question is like compare them. So
Yeah.
what I want to do is instead of giving two separate kind of chart, and is there any way I can put them
Combine,
together?
Yeah.
Just
good
kind of
question.
make a,
You can combine
Combine-
them at this. step.
or
Let's-
what you'll do is just like kind of make another pivot table of like comparing the sum of revenue 2023 and 2024 with one pivot table and then create like a new
Yeah,
chart.
that, you can definitely do it that way. Whether you can combine them at this step, I'm actually not totally sure. If you click on this table and go to your pivot chart, analyze, and then go to change data source. If there's any way we can give it, well, that's our save source. I don't know if you can, once you have the charts, if you can then combine them.
Mm,
Yes, because the chart is generated from the data set.
Yeah,
so if you copy and paste like those two guys in like the same sheet, it couldn't do the pivot table because all the data are messed up. Because they're like previous, like a month and everything. So
Yeah, well,
they
so
just not doing that way.
yeah, well, so if we do it that way, we could do our pivot table a little differently to group it by year as well. So actually, maybe let's look at that. Okay. So we're talking a little bit about how to, there's a few different ways to do this in two separate charts. We talked about that. Let's talk about how this might look if we wanted to combine our data and do this in a single view. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to, so we didn't have too many sheets. All right. Over here. Okay. So there's two different ways I could combine this. What I could do is I could do this step for each year, and I could paste these two things together as their own data source and make a chart based on this. That's one way I could do it. Another way I could do it is I could just combine my data from these two tabs into a single tab or sheet and do my pivot table from there. So let's say I'm gonna call this combined campaigns. And I could combine my data. So what that might look like, I could come in here. I'm just gonna copy paste this. So whenever I'm doing something like this, I always leave my source data, my original 2023, I'm leaving this untouched. Okay, I'm just moving it over to my combined campaigns. And usually when I'm copy pasting at this point, you wanna think about whether you want your formulas to stick around or not. In this case, my formulas are all good to stay because how I'm copy pasting is gonna stick around as well. All right, so then I'm gonna come over to my campaigns 2024 tab. First thing to notice when I'm combining data sets is that this data, my columns are in a slightly different order. You see I have show ID and then advertiser. Here I had advertiser, then CPM, then show ID, so it's gonna get a little funky. So first thing I would do here is just reorder my columns so that they match my columns here. So I had campaign, advertiser, CPM. let's do that. And then in this one, I had show ID after that. I'm gonna move my show ID. I'm gonna right click here and do insert a new column. And I'm gonna cut and paste my show ID over here. All right, make sure that didn't break any of my formulas. I just copied it, so it did not. Now I'm gonna delete this one. That's gonna break my revenue formula, but I'm okay because I'm gonna use the one I've got in my other tab. So I'm gonna hold on for this for a second. This is gonna be fine. All right, and then the next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come to my combined tab here, and I'm gonna take my data set. So I'm gonna take my ID, advertiser, CPM, campaign month. I'm gonna look here. I have campaign, advertiser, CPM. Did I get that right? CPM. Nope, I need show ID over here. Let me fix that. Right, moving my show ID so that my columns are in the same order. Okay, I'm gonna delete this one. All right, great. So I've got my columns. These guys are all good to go. I'm gonna take these, copy them, and move on down to the bottom of my other data and put these right in here. Okay, now I might want to be careful since I'm seeing that my campaign IDs are going to repeat, make sure I'm not assuming somewhere that those are going to be unique. Like if I were doing a unique count of ID, that might cause me an issue. I'm not doing that formula here, so I'm good, but just something to be aware of. All right, next thing I want to do is get my date. Now I had my dates in a different column here because I had to construct them with a formula. So if I copy paste this formula, it's going to get weird. It's going to not have my number column. So what I'm going to do when I grab this chunk of data, I'm going to grab this top one. I'm going to do Shift Command down key to go all the way to the bottom of my column. All right, I'm going to copy. And then when I paste this, I'm going to right click when I paste and do a paste special to just get my values. Okay, the reason that I'm doing that is if I pasted my formula, it's going to try to make a month out of this CPM. And that's not useful. 27.53 is not a month. That's not good for me. All right, so I'm going to choose to paste it as my values. It's looking a little weird. And when my numbers look a little weird, I go to my number formatting menu. So I'll put these back as a date and I'll see that my dates came back to me. Specifically, in my formula editor, it's just a date. It's just the text of a date. My formula is gone, even though over here, when I click on a date, my formula bar is still my formula. Okay, so whenever you start kind of combining, moving data around, you want to think about whether you want the formula to copy or not. In this case, I did not because I wanted to make sure that it remained the date that I said. I don't have a month number column here. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these formulas on down. So I'm using the same downloads revenue formula for both years. All right, and now I have this data set that instead of having 1,000 rows for 2023, it should have like 1,500 rows or something like that. Yeah, so I can just do, most Excel at the bottom, your bottom toolbar is gonna like auto generate some numbers when you select a column. So I'll just quickly kind of gut check my count. It's about 1,500. That sounds about right. So in 2024, I had about 500 campaigns. Perfect. Okay. So now I have a single data set here, and now I could select my data. I could do an insert pivot table, do a new worksheet, and I could start to play around with this. I could say campaign month, we did this before. I could do revenue, we did this before. And then I could start playing with how I'm displaying my date. My date options will come up here. Should discover my other. My dates. Here, let me show you on this tab. Yes, okay. Great here. So in this case, I'll swap my tab so I can show you what it looks like. Okay. Fantastic. So in this example, which should be similar, I've done like a bit of a different pivot table situation, but you should in your dates, and I think possibly my 365 version is not popping up, but when you do your dates, you should get sort of a what time scale do you want your dates to be grouped by. So in this case, it's recognizing that these are dates, and I chose that I wanted it to be displayed by month. So in my combined data set, I could make that same choice by year. Okay, so when I'm giving it a date in my rows, I think this is just a 365 thing that it's not popping up for me, but when you have your column formatted as a date, it's in your pivot table and you have it in your rows, you should get a pop-up that gives you an option to grab months or years or quarters, weeks, whatever kind of date scale you want to group it by. So to your question about combined data and how we would do this from the combined, I would do a combined by year first and then month. And then when I make my pivot chart from there, my 2 years will be separated. Does that make sense? Okay, great. All right, switch back to this guy. Right. Did anyone do this a different way or any other questions about this one? So we had a way to do it with formulas. We had a way to do it in 2 different charts. We have a way to combine all the data, which takes a little bit more kind of munging around, but might be a little easier at the end. So it just kind of depends on where you want to put in work. All right. I guess one last consideration I would add is you might want to think about we're coming to the end of 2024. Next year, if this is a dashboard or a data product you might be updating in the future. If you were going to add 2025 data, what way would be easiest for future you to add more data to? In that particular case, I would probably say our strategy of combining all the rows into just one tab, one sheet might be easiest, because when I add 2025, I could just refresh my pivot table and then it would just pull right in versus having to do another analysis for another year, but kind of up to you. All right. We have a few more minutes. I would love for everybody to at least think about one more kind of chart or stat or something that you might like to see based on this data. So we've been poking around in here quite a bit. We've been looking at versions of this data for the past couple of weeks. You can think about other questions that you might want to see. What is the top revenue earning show? For example, we looked at revenue by advertiser. We didn't break revenue down by show. That could be interesting to look at. We could look at what is our top revenue earning month. We have almost 2 years worth of data. You might want to look at, are we earning the most sort of in the holiday season, in the fall, in maybe around New Year's? What are kind of our top revenue earning months? We looked a little bit by advertiser. You could look at advertisers across years. We could look by campaign. We also didn't dive into that. But when we look at our advertiser campaign data, we have our advertiser running in a certain month on certain shows. So we could say that we want to define a campaign as a certain advertiser spending within a certain month across multiple shows. We could think about what are the largest campaigns that have run. We define a campaign that way. So a lot of different questions that we could ask, and you can kind of start to see, just talking through those, all of those are questions that we could answer with pivot table, which is pretty cool. Revenue by show, which I just sort of like thought of right now, right? We could do that. We could just grab all our data. We could insert a pivot table. Let's do a new sheet, and we could do show ID. We could do revenue. We could sort so that we can see largest revenue earning shows. Awesome. Our top show earned $314,000. Super cool. And with pivot table, I can answer that question super fast. So any question like that, once you have all of your data in one place, you can be doing this sort of thing. Okay. We're a little short on time, so I think I might move on, but hopefully if you have some extra time or just want to kind of play with your pivot tables a little bit more, you can think about some other questions that you might want to answer. Okay. All right. How's everybody feeling? That was a lot in there. Feeling okay? Feeling good? Anybody feeling totally lost? All right, come talk to me after if you're feeling totally lost. We can figure it out. All right, so the last piece I kind of mentioned at the beginning is adding interactive features. So once you have pivot tables and pivot charts, you can add a couple more fun things called slicers and timeline, which are going to allow your end user to come in and interact with your data yourself. So if you have a pivot table or pivot chart set up in your dashboard, I encourage you to add one of these so you can see how it looks. I will show you an example. Switch to the other one again. Great. So I'm in here, I'm in my dashboard. So this is an example of a timeline that I added to this pivot table. So this is the pivot table that I made of our top 5 advertisers. That was the second one that we did earlier. All right, and when I'm in my pivot table, I get, it's cutting, the screen's cutting it off a tiny bit, but in my upper ribbon, you should get a pivot table analyze tab whenever you're clicked into your pivot table. You should get this little option. And under your pivot table analyze in your ribbon, you're going to see an option to insert a slicer or insert a timeline. They're basically the same. Timeline is just going to give you dates. So I have done that for this pivot table. And what that means is that I get this little thing. And if I just wanted to say what were my top 5 advertisers in August, I could just click here and it's updating to August, which is pretty cool. I could say August. Show me, you know, for, let's see, Q4, October through December, and my pivot table is updating right away just based on some dragging and dropping that I'm doing. So these are a super great tool if you're going to be sharing this dashboard with, you know, if it's going to be like shared with your team or your company, it's going to include people who don't really know their way around Excel. It's much easier for somebody to click around in here versus like edit your formula themselves, right? All right, and then, oh, question. Great. So once you have your timeline, it's going to update any your associated pivot table. You can also clear it out, just clear the filter. That'll reselect everything. Come right back on in. And same thing with the time periods. You can say whether you want it to be able to select by quarter. Maybe we want to give it quarters. And it's going to give us a little bit of a neater look if we just want to be able to select by quarter instead of month, right? Slicers are very similar. They're just going to give you, if it's a list like this, where it's a list of options, it'll give you a list of options you can select from. That was a screenshot I had at the beginning with days of the week, release days, that kind of thing. All right. So I definitely encourage you to give that a try. They should be pretty straightforward once you have a pivot table or chart set up, and they're a great kind of like final little finishing touch. Just a few kind of last considerations about dashboards. When you're thinking about the layout, so now that you have all of your components, right, we should have some different pivot tables, pivot charts on different sheets. You want to come back to these questions that I mentioned at the beginning, right? What questions am I trying to answer? What action am I trying to get someone to take? What am I trying to inform? Okay, that might help you decide things like which chart do I want to go on the top? Do I want to give someone a table or just a visual chart view or both? Do I want to try to highlight something in a certain color if it's something I really want them to pay attention to? So there's lots of options that you can play with in the formatting. It can be easy to kind of like get distracted and kind of all the options. I would say just try to focus in on what are the questions that you're trying to answer? What are these kind of guiding questions? And that'll help you kind of decide and not get too lost in all the little like formatting details. Okay. In general, just some good practices for anytime you're sharing any data that you've put together. Every component should have a title. The axes on your chart should be labeled, which you can do in your pivot chart ribbon. I don't remember which tab I have open. Okay, but on your upper ribbon, there's your add chart elements button when you're in your chart ribbon. So you should make sure you have your axes, make sure anything that's, you know, currency is labeled as such, any other units you should have labeled. And in general, you should always have a legend of some kind on your chart. I would also say when you're doing a dashboard in Excel, you have a ton of flexibility. So we noticed this example with the pivot table earlier where we just added another column right along the side and did a formula. You can do the same thing with text. So you should make sure that you have titles on things. If it's a complicated chart, you should make sure that you type out what the chart is doing, that you have that kind of text in there so that whoever's looking at your dashboard later knows what they're looking at. Okay. All right. Cool. And in general, you want your dashboard to kind of fit on one like average size computer screen so that people aren't expected to scroll. So try adjusting your sizing, all of that. And just in general, I think try to be consistent. Anytime someone's looking at this, if they're needing to sort through why is the font bigger over here, you only want that to be larger if it's something that's more important. You should also, in general, anytime you have a dashboard, you should have just one sentence at the top that says what this dashboard is and what it does. These types of documents and tools exist everywhere in companies and teams, and it's often very hard over time to tell what is what. So you should just make some very quick notes anytime you're doing this. A little statement, it's good to put like your name or your email at the top so if someone finds it later, they know who's in charge of running it. You should also make notes or links to anywhere you grabbed the data from. It's always a really good practice. And I also encourage you to always include the last date that you updated it so that you can have that kind of running record anytime you come back. Also, once you have your dashboard all set up, you can hide your grid lines, which can make it look a little cleaner, a little more friendly to people who aren't necessarily as familiar with Excel. So to just show you on this example, so this is sort of a simple response to the prompt that we did. I added my title. All I did up here was just make the font a little bigger for the title, made it bold, just a couple little simple things like that can really help. Same thing with my titles for each of my charts. So should probably make that column a little wider so I can read my whole header. Okay, but kind of simple. I made them all a size so that all four of them fit in kind of one screen. You don't have to scroll. I have my filter. This filter is green because it goes with this table, which I also made green. Okay, just little visual cues like that, anything to make it as easy as possible. And then once you're like happy with how everything is, you can get rid of your grid lines, which is kind of a nice little finishing touch. So I can come in my view ribbon at the top, uncheck my grid lines, and now I've got like a nice view. This would be much nicer if I wanted to screenshot or, you know, you need to print it out for your really old school boss or anything like that. All right, it's a little nicer to look at. Okay. Cool. Any questions about formatting? And then again, just make sure that your sheets are labeled. Your raw data, you should always include, I would always label it like raw or something like that, or just what it is. If you have any like draft tabs or anything left in there, just label that they're drafts so that it's clear when you're sharing it. And if you want to display a pivot chart without the table, then you can keep the table on one tab and move the chart. So that's just a little way to make it a little bit cleaner. So if I'm in my chart, for example, for this one, my pivot table is here, but my chart is over in my dashboard tab. When I'm in, I can do this for either a table or a chart. When I have a pivot chart selected, I can go to my pivot chart analyze ribbon at the top and hit move chart. And that will let me move it to either a new sheet or whatever tab I already have open, so I can move it around. And same thing with a pivot table. If I'm over here and let's say I wanted to move my pivot table over to that tab, all I do is I select my pivot table, come up to my pivot table analyze ribbon in the top, and then you get this little button move pivot table. It's a little weird, but you can't just like drag and drop or copy paste a pivot table without it getting weird. So if you use your move pivot table button in the ribbon, it'll carry all of its functionality with it. Make sure you won't lose anything. All right. All right. So yeah, do you have a question?
Could you show us again how to put only like top five advertisers in the pivot table if you have like more than 5?
Definitely. Let's switch back to that one. So if I'm in my pivot table, all right, so this is just a regular old pivot table right here. I have my little sort filter button right here in my pivot table. I'm gonna pop that open, and then I'm gonna, get rid of this for a second. So I have my sort by value, which I've already done by sum, but then I can have my filter by value. Filter by value gives you a few options. It should give you one that says top 10. It's a little misleading because then you can tell it how many items. So I'm gonna say for my top 10, I would like my top 5. Just type in 5 there and it should update your table to just show your top 5. So I'm in my filter. So from my pivot table, I'm right here. Then under your filter section, you should have filter by value and you should have a top 10 option. Great.
Sorry, also another question. What
Yeah.
is the name of the chart you're using?
Great question. This one right here?
Yeah.
This is stacked area. It's under line.
Stack.
Yeah, so under the chart types, the chart type thing doesn't pop up on the screen share for some reason. But if you go in chart types, it should be chart type line, and then there's a few different line. You can do stacked line or stacked area.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, question?
How do you have to filter?
Add this thing right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just, I'm gonna click into my pivot table. I'm gonna go up to my ribbon at the top, my pivot table analyze. And I'm gonna do insert, for this one, it's a timeline because I wanted it by date. If I wanted it by another thing, I would do insert slicer. If I wanted it by advertiser.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Here, I could try that. I could do insert slicer just for fun. And we could do by advertiser. Okay. All right, great. And then it's going to give me this little pop-up of my different advertisers. I could say, just show me Casper. And then it's going to filter down. Now, because I already had this one just grouped by advertiser, this isn't like the most helpful slicer. I might want to do a different one. But yeah. It's there. You can also do a slicer. Once you have it, you can swap it around. New one. All right, so I'm in my chart. I'm going to go up to my pivot table analyze. It's so hard to do it looking at the screen. I'm going to do a slicer. You can also use things that aren't in your final table. So I could say I want to slice it by show ID, even though show ID isn't like in here. This would have been probably more user friendly if I had done show title, but I could say just show me the top 5 advertisers on show number 8, and it's going to give me those 3. So that's even though show isn't in there, it's in the source data that I gave my pivot table. So it can still pull from this. And then same deal, once you have these, you can clear them out from here. Unfortunately, I think that's going to kill my top 10 thing. So I'm going to have to go and put that back after I mess around with my slicers. Cool. Any other questions about sort of formatting or any of this setup? And once you have your slicers, once they're floating around, you can just delete them. You can drag and drop them like this. I can come up to my slicer. You can also style these a little bit. So for example, because this chart is green and that slicer applies to that chart, I might also set it to show up in green just to be like a little visual cue. Question, yeah.
Can we see the pivot table of cumulative revenue on of cheers?
Yes, great. So this one is here. So this one, I actually didn't do the cumulative part in the table at all. So this is all this is doing is sum of revenue. I just happen to do advertisers as the columns and months as the rows. But this is just doing a regular old sum. The only reason that my chart is showing cumulative is because I picked the stacked option. So it's just stacking the chart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Problem. So yeah, that would be a case where I might want to ask my end sort of user person, do they just want the visual, like kind of total, we know we're stacking up to about 1.5 million, or do they actually want to know that as of, August, we were at 1.2 million? If they want to know that sort of information, I might want to do a chart and a formula or a table and a formula like we did earlier. So just the kind of like thing you'll figure out by talking to whoever wants to look at this. All right, any other questions about how we got here? Yeah, many different ways you could have done the charts, added additional kind of, again, you could have done a single number that's just total revenue, anything like that. Cool. All right, so that's all I got for Excel week 4. As I talked about a little bit last week, we're starting SQL in 2 weeks. So I hope to see some of you there, or SQL in, oh my God, I can do math, 3 weeks. SQL starts on the 21st. We're going to be doing SQL and Python for data analysis. This workshop is definitely geared for folks who have never, if you've never done SQL, you're not really sure what that is. never done Python, anything like that, any coding, that's totally fine. You'll find, especially with the SQL part, it's gonna be very similar to the types of things we were doing in Excel, but you can do them sort of to the next level. So you can just join data together, you can summarize data, analyze data, all of the same things we've been doing, but you can do it sort of a little bit faster and with more flexibility in a programming language like SQL. I promise it's the absolute easiest programming language to learn of all of them. So if you've ever wanted to dip your toe in, you haven't yet, definitely come. If you've done a little bit of coding, that's also totally cool. We'll have some like stuff so you can, whether you're totally new or not, I think it should be a good workshop. So we'll focus on SQL for the first 2 weeks. We'll focus on Python for weeks 3 and 4, and then we'll kind of bring them together in our last week toward the end of the semester. Cool. All right, I'll hang out for a few more minutes if you have any other questions. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Yeah.
Because yours is like, and mine is like.
Stacked, yeah.
But it doesn't show.
Because I had mine also broken down by advertiser. So you need to add in your pivot table, you need to add advertiser here. Yeah, add it as a series. Yeah, there you go.
Wow, so fancy.
But this,
Yeah.
this doesn't look like yours. It's growing, so it's like, I don't know, like stacking.
I
It's
see.
not
Okay.
actually second. I think it's still breakdown by month.
Oh, it's still interesting.
So is there like an option that you can choose to?
Oh, yeah, it should
Are the
be
months
different.
definitely going in order?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, months are going in order. Okay.
And I'm still like getting those, like prior to January, and I don't know how to like do it.
Okay, so that you could filter out, so you could add date as a filter in here, so you can do, make sure you do shift before you grab it. And then you can drag and drop it into your, yep, great. And then it'll just come into your filter up here. And then you should be able to filter that out, just uncheck it and it'll pop out. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, just the one, yeah. Yeah, cool. Okay.
Do you know what's the problem? So is it probably? Short.
Sorry, okay, yep, there's one more step, so go to your revenue. You're in control, right? Okay, go to your show data, add your calculation, do running total in. Yeah. Try that. Yeah, there you go, okay, good call, yep, I totally skipped over that. Good catch.
Oh, that, even in that stuff, I got it really very low.
Oh, okay, cool. What do you got in your access
Where is
tab
it?
here? You got the-
Radio shall act.
All right, so let's look at what chart, go to your chart analyze, which is in your chart design, I think. Yeah, let's do change chart types. And should be a line. Should be stack areas, is the middle one. So that-
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that'll get you the stack, and then you wanna do the running total. Show data, running total, and then by month.
然后这里
哦
要
，so
那个 month，
哦，对对，month。
Oh, you might have to do your I think it's campaign month on yours. Data, running total, go up a little bit.
不待我课吗？我也是6点半，
There you go.
Okay.
本身6点半嘛。
Oh, brand new.
No, no.